Hello guys, this is Tafazwa from StackDev. Welcome to my YouTube course. So in this course, we are going to learn about creating GitHub Actions. So throughout the course, you are going to learn what GitHub Actions are, why they're important, and why as a software engineer is important for you to know how to create one. So without wasting much of your time, let's just quickly jump into the slides. So what are GitHub Actions? So GitHub Actions are simply an API which orchestrates any workflow in a GitHub repository. So imagine you're working on a project and there are so many daunting tasks that you have to do, so many commands that you have to do. For example, pushing your images to a development server, from a development server to a testing server, and until to a live server. So at times you notice that you have so many jobs that you'd have to do manually. So many things that you have to do. For example, like if an issue is raised on your GitHub repository, at times you'd have to manually check if there are any issues, if maybe perhaps you did not receive it in your email, and at times you'd have to do some daunting tasks manually. So this essentially is where GitHub Actions comes into play. So GitHub Actions, they're just individual tasks that you can combine to create jobs and customize your workflow. So which means you can create your own actions or use and customize actions shared by the GitHub community. So as we go through the tutorial, you are going to appreciate more why it is important for you to know how to create a GitHub action, because at times out there, most of the actions have been written, but at times you might want to, orchestrate or maybe to include your own custom job or your custom task in a specific workflow. So it is important for you to appreciate how you can do that using GitHub actions. So basically, the main use cases where one is required to know GitHub Actions or where you are supposed to implement them is, like, for example, when you want to send an SMS alerts when agent issues are created. So this process, you can automate this process using GitHub Actions. And also the most famous one, which is the most important one, and which is the most thing that we're going to look in this course that we're going to learn is when you're working with CDCI pipelines. So for those who are not familiar with the term, so CDCI is simply continuous delivery and continuous integration workflow, where as a software engineer, you are required, as you are developing a product, you are continuously developing, and as you are developing, you are supposed to deliver your code. And throughout this process, you are supposed to integrate your project or your workflow with other workflows. Like, for example, let's say you are developing a project, and as you are developing for a project from your laptop or from your development server, you are supposed to, when you push your code so that your code will become live, essentially the normal process that is supposed to happen in CDCI pipelining is your code is perhaps maybe supposed to be pushed on a testing server, and at that testing server we can actually run automated scripts on that testing server, and your code will be tested so that we'll actually make sure that there are no bugs or there are no issues with the changes that we've made to the code or with the feature that we have implemented. And after the changes are pushed to the live server, then the code will then be automatically be pushed to a live server if there are no issues. So throughout this process, as you can see, if a feature, for example, if maybe someone who is going to test your code on a testing server, if they find that there are any issues, you are supposed to recommit the code again to your testing server so that the code will be tested. Once the code is successful, it will then be pushed to a live server. So essentially with CDCI pipeline, we are just trying to make sure that each and every feature that you develop or each and every change that you made to your code on your product, there will be more or less less bugs, or in most of the time no bugs that will affect the already existing code. That's why CDCI pipelining are important when it comes to DevOps or in software development. So with GitHub Actions, CDCI is one of the main feature, is one of the main tool that we use GitHub Actions for. And also you can actually write a GitHub action to publish your NPM modules. For those who are familiar with Node.js, I think we'll look at that later on. So there are essentially three types of GitHub actions, which is the Docker container, the JavaScript, and the composite run steps. So all these containers, they all run on a Linux environment or a Linux operating system, which will be the test runner. I think we'll look at it when we jump into detail in code. So the JavaScript and the composite steps, they both run on the Mac OS and Windows, but the Docker container only runs on the Linux server or on the Linux test runner. So for you to be able to choose which GitHub action you are supposed to use, for example, you're supposed to develop, it just depends on your project and on the requirements of your project. Like for example, if your project is environment or configuration specific, like for example, you require to have specific versions of some packages, or you require to have a specific OS configurations, it's best for you to implement a GitHub action using a Docker container. But if you do not have specific things that maybe you might require versioning and stuff like that, it's actually almost welcome to use a JavaScript action or a composite run steps. So in terms of speed of these actions, you can actually note that the JavaScript action is more faster than the Docker container, because at times the Docker container might require to pull some external repositories or some external packages from different places, which might in turn make it slower, but it's not that slow that you would notice. But the JavaScript workflow, a workflow that is a GitHub action that is created using JavaScript, are much more faster. So with the composite run steps, we are saying you are essentially combining different workflows and packaging them or combine them into a one workflow, so that you can actually have a workflow that has different features or different features from different workflow combined together to have an amazing workflow. So in this course, we are going to create a GitHub action using JavaScript. So which means in this case, we are going to implement it using Node.js. So I think we'll look at it later on. So essentially what we're going to look at is we're going to create a GitHub action using JavaScript. And this GitHub action is going to deploy a Django application to Heroku. And this workflow is going to be automated by our GitHub action that we're going to write, so that you guys will be familiar with how we can automate that task from developing your action until that action is being used to automatically deploy your Django application to a Heroku live server. So without wasting much of your time, I think it's time for us to now look at our code. See you in the next one. All right, so let's quickly go on to our documentation on GitHub Actions, and let's quickly go on to creating actions, and in this particular case, creating a JavaScript action. So as we are going to create our JavaScript action, one thing that you need to make sure is you need to make sure that your JavaScript action is entirely written, is entirely JavaScript code, which means we are not supposed to have other binaries. For example, let's say we are not supposed to have an issue whereby you have binaries that are developed in Windows, maybe that might not be compatible in Linux, or that might not be compatible in Mac OS. So you notice that your entire JavaScript action, your entire GitHub action will be written entirely in JavaScript and will not depend on other binaries. Right. So one of the prerequisites that you have to make sure is you need to make sure that you have installed Node.js. And if you haven't installed Node.js, you just quickly go on the documentation of GitHub Actions and then on this page, and you can actually go ahead and quickly click on this link and it will navigate to the Node.js website where you can actually install your Node.js on your machine, be it Windows, Linux, or macOS. So in this case, I have already installed Node.js. So let me just quickly jump into my VS Code, and on terminal, let me just quickly type node version, and it actually saying I have installed Node 12.16.1. So after you've installed Node.js, if you run this command, it will show you the Node.js version that we have. So one thing that you need to make sure is you need to make sure that you have at least Node.js 12 as recommended from the documentation. So if you go to the browser, you can actually see that if you want to create a GitHub action using Node.js, you are supposed to have at least Node.js 12. Otherwise, you have issues if you do not have at least Node.js 12. All right, so now that we have installed our Node.js, let's now quickly go ahead and initialize our repository. So let me jump ahead to our VS Code. So once you are in VS Code, let me just go ahead and clear my terminal. So as you can see, what I did is I simply created a GitHub repository, which is empty. And this gets if I can ls, you can actually see that there is a license file, so I cloned it. So let me show you what I did. So if I jump back to the browser and I go to my GitHub, and from my GitHub, from my username, there's a heroku-django-deploy example. So this is the repository that I created, and as you can see, the repository is empty. There's nothing there. So you can, if you want to follow along with this tutorial, you can actually go ahead and create your own repository, and you can actually go ahead and clone your repository into your VS Code. So let me quickly go back to my VS Code. So once you have cloned your repository, and for example, in my case is empty, you need to initialize your repository with npm init. So in this case, I'm just going to type the command npm init. This will initialize our Node.js application. So in this case, the package name, I'll just simply enter the version, enter. Then the description, I will put maybe simple GitHub action that deploys a Django application to Heroku. So this is the description I'm going to put. Then as the entry point, I'm just going to leave as index.js, test command, then the Git repository, the keywords, the author, you can put your name. So in this case, I'm going to put my name and surname. Then the license, I'll put MIT. So essentially, this is just initializing your GitHub repo. There's nothing to worry about here. So as you can see, what it does is if you've initialized the GitHub repo, the npm the node.js will quickly create a package.json file. So in this package.json file, it will have all the commands that we have entered here. For example, the author, the license, the URL for a repository, and etc. So one thing that you need to note here is under the main section here, there's an index.js file. So we are going to have two files that we're going to create. So the first one is the index.js file. This is where we are going to write all our JavaScript code or our Node.js code that are going to automate the workflows that we want to automate in our GitHub action. So, and then the second file that you need to make sure that you have is the action.yaml file. So let me, from this point, I'll go ahead and play my terminal and just quickly create the index.js file for now. Then after you have created an index.js file, then you can actually see that my index.js file is empty. Then quickly create another file called action.yaml file. What am I doing? Okay, action.yaml file. So I will explain to you what this action.yaml file do, but as for now, just make sure that you have these three files in your code as for now. All right. So one thing that we need to, if you go out to your package.json, so for those who are not familiar with Node.js, a package.json file is simply a file that has all the definitions of your Node.js application. Like for example, if we are going to install other dependencies, all the dependencies that we are going to install, they are going to be reserved, they're going to be pointed here from the package.json file under dependencies. So right now there's no dependence section. So let's just quickly go to our documentation and see what's the next step that we're supposed to do. So after we have initialized our Node.js file, we need to create an actual.yaml file, right? So we have created an actual.yaml file. So what is an action.yaml file? So an action.yaml file is just an entry point that is going to GitHub is going to look for whenever your action starts, right? So which means this is the file that we are going to define what we call the inputs and the outputs variable, and as well as the starting point of your running application for the JavaScript code. So this file, what it does, the action.yaml, it actually tells the runner on how to start running your JavaScript application, which is how, or in other words, it's actually going to tell the runner how to start the index.js file using the Node.js 12 version that we just installed. So I think I will show you once we are now looking at the action.yaml file. So instead of in terms of dependencies that I just mentioned earlier, you need to make sure that you install an actions.core toolkit from the GitHub. So what this toolkit file package does is the action./core is actually a Node.js package, which means it's written in JavaScript using Node.js. It's actually the interface to the workflow commands, which are the inputs and outputs and variables and status of the debugging messages. So what it simply does is it gives you an interface to directly communicate with your GitHub Actions, where you are going to actually query data using some of the custom methods that are already defined there. So from now, just quickly go ahead and I'm going to copy this command, and I'll go to my VS Code and quickly install the actions /core package. So once you hit enter, it will take a couple of seconds to install the package, right? So now it's done. So as you can see, my package.json file has been updated. Then under dependencies, you can actually see that we now have the action/core package. So like I mentioned earlier, this package allows us to it's going to provide us with an interface to the workflow commands, which means all the inputs, the outputs variables that we are going to define in our action.yaml file, we'll be able to query them using with the help of the actions.core package. I know it doesn't make sense now, but once we are now writing code in our index.js file, you can actually see how this is going to be helpful. So once you have installed this, you can actually see that it has created a Node.js module which means all the packages and dependencies that we're going to install in this package. For in this case, we are only going to install the actions.core package, going to be hosted under the lib folder. So you need to make sure that your installations are working correctly. If you see that you have an actions a node underscore modules folder, it means that your code is working pretty fine. So one last thing that I have to mention is, I think if you jump back into the documentation, we have an actions.github. This one, don't worry about it. We are not going to use it in this particular case. It's not necessary for now, but for what we want to achieve, I think we just need that actions.core package. Then once you have that, I think everything should be ready. So now all right, so now let's now look at our index.js file. But before we look at that, remember, like I mentioned earlier, we said we want to create a GitHub action that is going to deploy a Django application to Heroku. So which means our action is supposed to automatically do that. That is automatically deploying our Django application to Heroku. So if you go on to our code, in our VS Code, you can actually see that we do not have the application as of yet. So what I'm going to do is simply going to pause this video, and then once I come back, I will have a Django application, and then I would think I would take you through from there. See you in the next one. All right, so now I have initialized my project with a folder called tests. So if you can see this folder highlighted in red, I've created a folder called tests, and inside tests I've created my Django application. So inside this Django application is just a simple application that we are going to use as a test to deploy our Django, to deploy this application to Heroku, because as we are going to be developing our GitHub action, we want to make sure that each and every change that we push or each and everything that we push, we're going to employ some CDCI, so that it will make sure that whatever changes that we're going to employ into our GitHub action, it will be verified by running the application to Heroku. It will sort of like do the CDCI process, like adding a new feature and redeploying the application to Heroku. So once the application is on Heroku, if there are no issues or errors, it will actually deploy our application to Heroku. But if there are any issues within a feature that might be added to our repository, it will complain and it won't deploy our application to Heroku. So this Django application is going to act as an example, so that you can actually see how we will push this, but it's also going to act as a tool for CDCI to verify the changes that we'll be doing on our action, whatever feature, a new feature that we might include. We will verify it using this application. If there are no issues, it will then deploy the feature that would have added to our live environment in Heroku. So let's just quickly go ahead and open the settings file. So inside the settings file, I have included a REST framework package. So in this case, I'm using pipenv as my virtual environment. So if I navigate to another terminal, then if I say I have a pip file here, so let me just show you the contents of the pip file. So if I say, if I review these contents, you can actually see that inside my pip file, I've installed the Django framework, and I've installed the Django REST framework that we want to use for application, and I've also installed something called white noise. So I'm sure you are familiar with the Django REST framework, but if you're not familiar with what white noise is actually Django does not Django does not actually require, does not provide a way to say in terms of saving our static files. So we need a way to actually go ahead and allow us to save our static files. So this is where white noise is going to come into play. So with Heroku allows us to save our static files using white noise. You might be familiar with other static file savers, for example, like nginx, but in this case, we're not going to use nginx, we're going to use white noise. So we can actually just go ahead and if you are using a visual environment, just go ahead and install pip install white noise and Django REST framework in your package. So once you have installed white noise, it's time for us to configure the white noise package. All right, so inside our Django application, if we go under middleware, we need to be able to add the configuration for white noise under middleware. So just go ahead and simply add this line of code. So don't worry if you do not have this package, just go ahead to the repository, which I'll give you in the link down below, and just go ahead and quickly clone it or fork the package so that you can actually have this example application. So once we have configured that, then for our database, I think we are going to uncomment these lines. I'll show you how we can actually configure things like Postgres on Heroku. I think we'll look at that later on. And also we need to add a line for configuring our white noise as well, which is with the variable static file storage, and we just go ahead and quickly add this line as well. So don't worry about these configurations. If you go to the Heroku, if you go to your browser, so let me just go ahead and quickly switch to browser. If you go to the Heroku website under Django static assets, you can actually see that this is the exact same thing that we just did in terms of installing our static file server. So as you can see here, we're going to use white noise. You can actually install white noise in your visual environment. Once you have installed white noise, you can actually configure it here in your middleware classes like I showed you earlier on. Then you can actually go ahead and add this package. So let's just quickly go ahead and run our application. So let me quickly navigate to my application. So inside tests and Django, this is where my application is. Let me just go ahead and clear the screen. If I run manage.py, run server. So right now I'm simply just going to run my Django application on my development server. There seems to be a mistake. Oh, okay. Let me navigate to where I've activated my virtual environment. So in here, let me just go ahead and run the command again. Manage.py run server like this. So if I run the server, you should actually see that our development server will start to listen at localhost 8000. So let's just quickly go ahead and navigate to our browser and navigate to port 8000. So if you navigate to port 8000, you can actually see that this is the example app. It's just a CDI/CI REST API, which just simply show you the CDCI pipelining tools that we can use. So to get started, just navigate to this endpoint/API. You can actually see that it does nothing much, but to simply return a JSON object with data and a message saying welcome to our REST API. Then if we navigate to tools like so, you can actually see that it actually go ahead and lists a list of CDCI pipelining tools that we can use together with their URLs. So for example, we have GitHub Actions with its link, and we also have a Jenkins, which also is a CDCI pipelining tool written in Java. that you can also use. We also have Circle CI, we have Bamboo, we have Travis CI, we have GitLab. So there are so many tools that we can use and DevOps to orchestrate some CDCI. So this is just a few example of the commonly used CDCI pipelining tools that we can actually use. There's also Amazon and stuff like that. So your imagination will only limit you, but there is quite a number of tools that you can use for your CDCI pipelining. So with this said, let me just quickly go ahead to my terminal. With this said, you can actually see that, remember, you need to put your application inside the root folder of your nodejs project, and under tests, under Django application, this is where you put your app. So with this said, I think it's now time for us to now jump into our nodejs so that we can start writing our code for our workflow. So without wasting much of your time, let's just jump into the code. Right, so now that we are ready to write some code in our index.js file, you need to make sure that you are authenticated. So whenever you are working with the Heroku, especially if you are working from the developer's point of view, you need to make sure that you have a Heroku CLI installed in your machine or in your computer. So you need to make sure that you have Heroku CLI. So let's just quickly jump into the Heroku browser website and actually see what you need to do to install the Heroku CLI. So actually the Heroku CLI, it allows you to manage your Heroku apps, which means if you don't have your Heroku CLI, you do have to do it manually using the browser. But in this case, since we are creating a GitHub action, everything will be done automatically from the command line. So for us to achieve this, you need to make sure that you have installed Heroku CLI in your development machine. So to do that, if you go to the documentation, there are ways of installing it. If you want to install it on a Mac OS, Windows, or Ubuntu, these are the commands that you need to follow. So once you have installed your Heroku CLI, if you just quickly go ahead and go to the terminal and type Heroku version, you should be able to see the Heroku version that you would have installed. So one of the things that you need to make sure is like I mentioned earlier, you need to make sure that you have installed Heroku CLI. So once you have successful, if you run Heroku version, you should be able to see your version. And also, since you are up to this stage, I'm sure you have already installed Node.js. Then one also other thing that you need to make sure that install is you have installed your Git. So I think I'll explain why you need to install Git. You actually see once we are at that part. So make sure you have those three things installed. So now that you have your Heroku CLI installed, you can actually go ahead and run commands like Heroku apps. For example, this command, what it does is it actually shows you the applications that you have on your Heroku live server. So in this case, for example, on this test server that I have these all these applications that I've installed that are on my Heroku server. So these are the applications that I have. I will show you shortly how you can create these applications using the Heroku CLI. So if you want to make sure that you are authenticated, you can actually go ahead and run commands like Heroku. What is the command? All right. Is it Heroku? Who am I? Let's see if this works. exactly. So if you run this command heroku who am I, it actually shows you the user that you are using. So in this particular case, it's showing the email address that I'm using. So you can actually go ahead and run. So I was confusing this command with this one, the auth who am I as well, right? So what this commands does is it actually show you if you are authenticated or not by actually showing the username, the I mean the email address of your Heroku server. So now that all these things, for you to achieve all these things that I'm doing, like for example Heroku apps, Heroku who am I, for you to be able to run these commands, one thing that you need to make sure is you need to make sure that you are authenticated or you have logged in. So Heroku is basically 3 to 4 methods on which you can authenticate. So the reason why I'm showing you all these commands is some of these commands, when we are now writing code to our action, to our index.js file in our JavaScript code, we are actually going to be using some of these commands to make sure if we are authenticated or not. For example, if I run Heroku auth who am I, it actually, if it retrieves your email address, it actually shows you, it actually means that you are authenticated. So some of these commands, you actually see them as you move on. So like I said, mentioned earlier on, one thing that Heroku does is for you to be able to run these commands, you need to make sure that you are authenticated. So for you to be able to authenticate, so there are 4 or 5 ways that you can actually see if you are authenticated. So if we just quickly go ahead under authentication on the documentation, there are 3 ways actually to actually do some authentication. So if I go to Heroku CLI, you can actually see that there's an API token authentication, retrieving of the API token, and the metric files. So before I confuse you with so much content, let's just learn by doing. So what I'm just going to do, I'm simply going ahead to go to my terminal and clear my terminal, right? So let's do the first one, which is the most familiar one. If I run Heroku login like this and press enter, what this command does is it allows you to press any key from your keyboard. For if you press any key from your keyboard, it will actually redirect you to the browser, so that you'd have to click manually the login button for you to be able to be authenticated. So right now, as you can see on the terminal, it's actually saying that Heroku waiting for login. So what this means is you only be authenticated if and only if you hit the login button on your browser. So if I go ahead and hit the login button like so, you can actually see that the browser is saying logged in, and as well as our terminal is now saying logged in as user and with my email address. So this is one of the ways you can log in. But now look, in this particular case, we are going to make sure that we need to log in our GitHub action on Heroku. But how are we supposed to log in if we're going to enter a browser? Remember, this thing is supposed to be done automatically. So we need a way of actually making sure that we achieve our login without us having to manually press a login button, which means it has to be done automatically. So what Heroku does is Heroku allows, whenever you run a Heroku login command, what it simply does is it creates a metric file which will be stored under your username. So if you quickly go ahead and go to the documentation and see on example usage, what it does when you run the command Heroku login, it creates a metric file in your root user of your user. And this network file, we have 5 fields. We have 6 fields, I'm sorry. The first one being the machine API, and then the login as follows, like this. Okay, so let me what Heroku does is, it under login, it puts the email address you would have logged in with, then it will push a hashed password again. Then under machine API dot get.heroku.com, it will put the username and also the password, a hashed password as well. So let me just quickly show you what it does. So if I open my terminal again, and since I've successfully logged in, which means I now have the network file. So if I open the network file like this, you can actually see that I now have this login and password, my hashed password. And for Git again, I will have my email and my password. So remember, like I said earlier on, you need to make sure that you have Git installed on your repository, because Heroku also uses Git to push your repositories or to push your application to the servers. So you need to make sure that you have Git. So this Git is from Heroku, and the API part is also from Heroku. This is what we get from using the Heroku login CLI. So now, to answer the question that I've asked earlier on, I asked how you can actually log in without manually pressing the login button. So for us to be able to achieve this, we need some way of updating this file, of creating and updating a network file in our root path of our operating system. And once we navigate there, we need to actually be able to write these commands in this network file. So the password now, like you can, as you can see, the password, like I mentioned earlier on, I said this password is a hashed password. But what this actually is it actually is an authentication token that Heroku provides. So how can we come up with this authentication file? So if you go ahead and run Heroku authentication and then token, what this command does is it creates a authentication token, which we are going to use for our password for both the Git and both the Heroku API. This is the authentication password that we're going to use. So which means when we are going to write our GitHub action, we are going to be using to we are supposed to have some way of having our authentication token and the email address. So if I run this command, it will create our token. So let me just do that. So if I run Heroku auth token like so, what it simply does, it will actually say, okay, this token I have created, which is this one, is going to expire on the 5th of January 2022. And it actually allows you to have a way of creating a long-term token as well. So if you want to create a long-term token, you can actually go ahead and write the Heroku authorizations create like so, and it will actually generate a long-term token. But in this particular case, we are going to use this short-term token. So if you have run this command, you need to make sure that you save your token and make sure that you save it somewhere on a separate file, because we'll be using this token in a few minutes. So this is how you can actually get the token. So just to sum up in terms of authentication, the reason why I'm showing you this command again is we want to be able to automatically log in from our GitHub action to Heroku using the action that we're going to write. So for us to be able to achieve this automatically, we need a way of updating of creating and updating a network file in our test runner, in this case our GitHub test runner, which we're going to run on Linux, on Windows, or on Mac OS. So in this particular case, we're going to run on Windows, on Linux, I mean. So we need a way of writing this network file, and once we wrote this network file, then we can actually go ahead and run and actually append all this detail to our network file on our test runner, so that we'll be able to authenticate our test runner, so that we'll be able to push our applications. Because building and pushing all the applications, it actually requires us for us to be authenticated first before we do that. So that's why we have created, I've showed you these commands. Both these commands, we're just going to be using them in a bit when we write code to our test rig. So I know that this has been long, guys, and let's for now, from this point onwards, let's just quickly go ahead and start writing some code in our project. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly open our VS Code. And from our VS Code, what we're going to do is we're just going to create an action that is going to log in to Heroku. So what we need first is, first and foremost, we need to include the core package that we've installed. So I'm going to declare a variable called core, because this variable, we are going to use it to query to get the inputs and the outputs that we're going to define in our actions.yaml file. So if I write core, then at actions, I'm just going to import the core package like so. So once I've imported the core package, remember we are using nodejs, so which means we can actually be able to write commands from our nodejs, since this is a scripting language. So from this one, I need to actually require from child process, which will allows us to run some commands using our code using nodejs. So from this child process, I want to specifically pull the execute synchronous, because if I pull exec, this exec will run asynchronously, but we want it to be able to run synchronously, because some of these processes are going to happen in stages. So once I've put these two packages, let me go ahead and create our variables. So I think I'll just add variables. I'll just add a variables comment. Then I will say I will create a variable called Heroku, and inside this variable, inside this object, what we want to do is I want to be able to get the app name, which is the application name, right? And this application name, I want to get it in my action.yaml file. So for now, I'll leave it like so, blank like so. Then we'll fill it in once we have created the input and the output in the action.yaml file. Then I also need to be able to pull the API key, right? So the API key is the token that I just showed you earlier on, that we are going to pull from our GitHub action. I will actually show you a secure way of storing that API key. Then I will actually also need the email address, right? Then I'll show you again how we can store that. Then I think with these three variables, I think we can actually go somewhere, right? So I've just created a JavaScript object which is going to store all these three attributes that we want to use, right? So once I've done that, I think it's time for me to actually go ahead and quickly look at the action.yaml file. So just save this file and navigate to the action.yaml file. So inside this action.yaml file, like we said earlier on, this file allows us to define our inputs and output variables. So these variables will be used by our GitHub action runner. This is the file where it will enter so that it will actually see which file from our nodejs application are we supposed to run. So this is where we define all the inputs and the output variables that we need. So just for the naming convention, we need to name this this file. So for the name, I can actually say this is a Heroku-Django deploy. It's a YAML file, Django deploy, like so, right? So that's the name I'm going to use. Then for the description, I can actually go ahead and put the description like so, and I will say it automatically deploys a Django application to Heroku. So that's the action file. So we are just simply giving it some name and some description just for readability. Then for the inputs now, under the inputs tag, this is where we are going to define all the inputs that we are supposed to have. So if we go to the index.js, I defined that we need three things: the app name, the API key, and the email address. So these are the inputs that I'm going to be having here. So if I say, so I can simply define Heroku app name like this, right? Then I can give this a description just for readability, and say this is the Heroku app name, like so. Then there's also a tag called required. So this actually tells our action runner whether this field is required or not. So the app name, for us to be able to run our authentication, we need the app name, we need the token and the app name as well. So it's going to be required. So I'm just going to say true here to actually say that this is required. So I'm also going to have Heroku API key, right, for authentication. So this I'm going to say this is a Heroku API key, like so. Then for the required tag, I'm going to say this field is obviously going to be required. Then for the Heroku email address, right, I'm going to put a description to say this is the Heroku email address, right? I need to put it in quotes. Then this is also going to be required. So now we have defined the three basic inputs that we need for application. Some of the inputs will include them as we go on. So for the outputs now, what I'm simply going to add here is I'm simply going to add our status so that we'll be able to know if our test runner is finished. So here for the description, I'm simply going to say status, like so, status of the action, right? So I'll actually show you how you can use this status once we are in the index.js file. Then, like we mentioned earlier, this file allows us to tell our test runner which what modules and packages we are using. So in this case, we have a using tag, right, which is going to say node 12. So we are telling our test runner that we're going to use node 12, and the main file that is going to be run by this by the test runner will be the index.js file. So for the most part, I think we have defined the most important inputs, and then the output section, and also this is a very important section as well. So we have defined our action file. So let's just quickly go ahead and save this file. All right. So now, since remember, initially we had include this core.js file. So what this means is we now want to be able to take the tags from our action that because this action.yaml file, it is going also to be used by our GitHub workflow, which we'll define shortly. So what we're going to do is I'm simply going to say, okay, so for the app name, I need to use the core package. Then I need to use a method, a function called get input. Then for the input name, I will simply go ahead and take the input name that I've defined here. So what this does is the Node.js will be simply told that, okay, for the input name, just go ahead and use the input name which would have been defined in something that we're going to call in our workflow, because we're also going to have a workflow folder for our GitHub action. I think I will show you later on. But this is just the declaration. The action.yaml is just the declaration, or is the blueprint of the things that we want to use. So for this one, for the app name, I'm going to put this like so. Then for the API key, let me just go ahead and copy and paste this, because this is all almost similar. I'm going to get the app name and as well as this at the email address. So for the Heroku app key, what did I name it? API key, like so. So let's just go ahead and paste this here. Then for the email address, I named it like so. So let's just go ahead and paste it here. So this is nothing much. It's just a JSON, a JavaScript object that is defining our object. So now remember, when we were doing our login, we were saying we need a way of updating our metric file, of creating and updating our metric file. So this is something that we are going to do. So the first command that we need to have here is a login function. So let me just quickly go ahead and create a login function like so. So I'm just going to use ES6 conversion using the arrow function. I think it's just my personal preference. If you want to write it as a function, then it's fine. You can actually go ahead and do that. So this is the login function that we're going to call as the first method here. So as the first method, we are going to call the login function here. So these are our calls now. So the reason why I want to execute synchronously is all these methods will be called synchronously, and its process will be called synchronously as well. So this is the first method that we want to run. So so we have created a method called login. So what do you want to do in this login method? So in this login method, we want to be able to authenticate our API, right? So let's just go ahead and include a try catch block here, right, like so. Then if there's an error, I'm simply go ahead and console log the error like so, error.message, right? But if you console log an error like so, when you run our GitHub action, you won't be able to see the error. So there's a method that sorry, you'll be able to see the error, but your action will continuously run. So we want our action, whenever there's an error, we want our action to stop right away so that it won't deploy or it won't proceed with the other functionalities of our workflow. So there's a method that is called setFailed that we need to write here. So we're simply going to write console.log setFailed so that it will actually show us the error that would have happened, and it will automatically stop the execution process with an error to say, okay, your workflow has failed here and this is the error. So the core GitHub core actions allows us to have this setFailed, which will stop the execution of our code, because we don't want it to continuously run other things while it has failed on, let's say there's an error in terms of login here. We don't want it to continuously try to do other things. We want it to stop its execution and actually show us the error that would have happened. So we use this with the with the helper function called setFailed. All right. So once you've done that, the first thing that we need to do, like I said before, if I am to navigate to my terminal, we actually said that Heroku updates a metric file. So we need a way of creating a metric file whenever we are logging in. So let's just go ahead and quickly create that function that is going to create a metric file. So here I will say create metric netrc file file for login, like so. Then I'm going to pass the Heroku objects because we need the app name, we need the API key, and the email address for us to be able to create this. So this metric file, I'm simply going to go ahead and create it here. And this method, I'm simply going ahead and create it here. And from this one, what we specifically require here is we actually need the API key and the email address, because remember, these are the two fields that we only require. Remember, if I am to go to my terminal, sorry about that, if I'm go to my terminal, remember we need the email address, which is this one, and the token, which is this one. So we need the API key token and then the email address. So I'm simply going to go ahead and pull using the ES6 method of pulling. I'm simply going to put an object, then I'll simply pull the email address, like so, and also the API key, like so. So I now have access to these API key and email address from our input. So once I now have this, I can actually go ahead and write our return statement, and I will simply say I want to execute this. So what I will do is I will say, okay, can you actually go ahead and create a file, right? And create a metric file called netrc, right? Then once I've created this file, what I want to do with this file is I want to be able to so I want to write end of file. So I'm demarcating the end of file so that I'll be able to write whatever that I want to write here. So I will say for the machine. So what I'm simply doing is I'm just taking that conversion that I just showed you, that it has a machine like this, and then it will say API dot heroku.com, like so, and then it has a login. It has a login, like so. So for the login, since this is a string, I'm simply go ahead and pull the email address, right, like so. Once I've put the email address and then the password, simply go ahead and pull the object, the variable API key, like so, right? Once I have done that, then I need the machine for the git.heroku.com. So I'm simply writing to my file here. Then I'll say for my login again, I'll simply go ahead and pull the email address, like so. And then for the password, I'll simply go ahead and pull the API key, like so. So what I've done here is I have created a metric file and I've written to the metric file with the values that we want. So what we are simply doing is we want to perform our authentication so that whenever we run commands like Heroku apps or Heroku who am I, it will actually go ahead and look for this file in our test runner on our GitHub test runner. Then it will actually look for this file. Once it has found this file, it actually makes sure that these values passed for authentication correct. If they are correct, then it actually retrieve whatever you have asked it from your command CLI API. So now that you have done this, we have created a metric file. So for me to make sure that it is now logged in, I can actually go ahead and create a user to actually see if it is logged in. So I can actually go ahead and create synchronous. We want to run this synchronously, so I can run a command called heroku auth who am I. So remember this command, and I want to string in so that I'll be able to buffer whatever the output is coming so that it will be readable. Then I'll actually go ahead and console log whatever output has been buffered to say whatever message that I want to pass here. So I can pass, I can say successfully logged in with user. Then I'll simply pull my variable like so. All right, so what we just did here is we have created our metric file and we put our authentication details. So if you run the Heroku who am I, it's supposed to give us the email address, just like what we did in the previous on that terminal. So if I am to write, for example, I'm already logged in, I can say Heroku auth who am I like so. Right, since I'm already logged in, I should be able to get an email address. So this is the kind of functionality that we just want to make sure that this is working. All right, so for our API, once we have done this, I think it's now time for us to actually go ahead and set our output. So in this case, I will set the output here. So remember, in our action.yaml file, we define the output with the status, right? We define the outputs with the status of the action. So once this is successful and it has no errors, we want to be able to set now our output to actually just to give a notification message to say everything went successfully or something like that. So from this particular juncture, I'm going to just set our output like so. Then inside this, then I'll pull the status. Remember, we had the status field. Then I'll simply prompt my message to say successfully logged in, like so. Logged in. So with this said, this is just a simple action using JavaScript, using nodejs, which will simply authenticate to see if our user is logged in. So this is the first step. So in the next section now, we now want to define our actions, our GitHub actions. We now want to be able to write our actions or our workflow, our GitHub workflow actions, so that we'll be able to use this API or to use this GitHub action that we've created to just make sure that everything is working. So from this particular juncture, you can actually see that we have defined our action. So in the next section, we now want to create our GitHub action just to make sure that we have got it right, and just to make sure that our user is being successfully logged in. So with that said, I will see you in the next one. All right. So what you want to do now, before I create my workflow, I just want to tag my GitHub action. So by tagging, what we mean is you want to tag it and then you give it a version for your release. Because once you release your GitHub action, it's supposed to have a version so that once you continuously create more features, they will have different versions so that your end users will be using your GitHub action according to their specific version that they would need at that specific moment. So what I will simply do is I'm just going to type git status, and once I type git status, I need to add everything to my staging area, and I'm just going to pretty much commit. So I'm going to say my first commit like so. All right. So now that we have made our commit, you probably notice that we have also committed our node modules. So if you have worked with Node.js, you probably know that we normally don't commit the Node modules folder into our GitHub or into your version control system. But in this particular case, when you are working with GitHub Actions, you need to commit your Node modules folder. So alternatively, there's also another alternative. If you don't want to commit your node modules folder, you can use a package called Vessel, which will pretty much bundle everything, your libraries, into an executable file or into a into a file that will be used for packaging your libraries. But in this particular case, I'm not going to use the Vessel third-party package. I'm just going to commit my node modules. So now that you have committed pretty much everything in your GitHub action, we want to tag it and give it a version. So if you want to tag it, you can just go ahead and quickly type git tag -a -m, and you put your description, my initial. So I'm just going to say my initial version, and I'm going to give it a version name, say version 0.1. So by 0.1, this is a pre-release. So I'm just notifying my users that this is a pre-release, and it's not recommended actually to use it for production because we are still developing. So this is a pre-release. That's why I'm giving it version 0.1. You can actually go ahead and look look into the GitHub docs to actually see the way you can version of things. So right now I'm having an error. I'm not supposed to have a quote here. So like this. So once I've tagged it and given it a version, it's now time for me to push the tag to my GitHub repo. So I'm just going to type git push then dash dash like this, follow text like so. So this will quickly push my GitHub action to my online GitHub repository. So this will take a couple of seconds. Right. So once it's done, you can actually see that it has pushed my GitHub to my master branch, and it's saying that it's a new tag with a version 0.1. So let's just quickly navigate to the browser and quickly go to GitHub, and I'm just pretty much going to refresh my page. We should be able to actually see our GitHub action. So as you can see, this is the GitHub action that we just pushed, saying 4 minutes ago. So this is the GitHub action that we just pushed, And by default, if you create a GitHub action, GitHub actually knows what you have created. So like for example, if you read at the top, it's saying publish this action to marketplace. So you also have an option to publish your action to marketplace once you are confident that you have all the features that you need in your action so that it will be used by other people or by other developers. So I think this is the last stage that we'll do. At the end, we are going to publish our action to the marketplace. But for now, you can actually see pretty much our action. All right, now it's probably time for us to create our GitHub workflow. So to create our GitHub workflow, you just need to create a folder code.github inside your root repository. Then we navigate to the .github folder and create another folder called workflows. So inside this folder, this is where we want to create our workflow, or this is where we want to create a file called main.yaml, which is going to be our workflow file. So if you are going to have multiple files, for the most part, this is where you are going to add them inside the workflow folder. So let's just go ahead and go to the main.yaml file. So to create our workflow, this is just a file that is going to define all our jobs and steps that we want our action to execute. So in this case, I'm going to name it a Heroku. I'm just going to name it a Heroku sign in. A Heroku sign in workflow, like this. That's the name I'm going to give it. Then I'm going to add something called an on tag. So an on tag, what it does is we want to tell our runner, our test runner, to say, when do you want to activate our workflow? So in this case, we want to activate our workflow each and every time we push something to GitHub, to a specific branch. So in this case, I'm distinguishing to say push whenever we push a feature or a change to a branch, in this case a master branch. Whenever we push something to a master branch, we want our runner to actually go ahead and start running our workflow. So in this case, this is how you do it. You push the on tag, then under the on tag you actually specify which conditions you want your runner to be activated by. So in this case, we're telling it to activate our workflow whenever we push something to our master branch. So in this case, I'm also going ahead to put a pull request. So whenever we put we have a pull request, in this case, I'm actually we're actually going to have we're actually going to trigger our workflow. Not that it matters much to have a pull to activate on pull requests, but in this case I just want to show you that even if you have a pull request, our action will be activated as well. So that's what the on tag do. So after the on tag, it's now time for us to define our jobs, because remember we said that our workflow, it's a file that is going to define all the jobs and the steps that we want to do. So I'm simply going to name it Heroku sign in. So this job, I'm going to name it Heroku sign in job. That's the job. So under this section, we need to tell Heroku, we need to tell our GitHub to say, okay, which test runner are you going to use? So in this case, remember we said a JavaScript action can use Linux, can use Windows, can use macOS. So in this case, we want to use Linux. So I'm just simply going to tell it to use Ubuntu latest as the image. So this is the image of our operating system that is going to be used by our test runner. So the runs on tag is the one that you use when we want to actually go ahead and define define the runner or the operating system that you want your action to be run on. So in terms of name, I'm just going to name it Heroku sign in job. Then after that, we pretty much need to now define our steps. So by steps, we are saying each and every job. Once we have a job, we need steps that our runner is supposed to act on. So these steps are very, very important, because this is where we tell our runner which steps to use. So the first step that we want to say is we want to probably check out our code to our runner. So by checking out our code, this is the normal conversion that you do when you want to when you are defining your action. You want to tell GitHub or our test runner to actually go ahead and check out our code to our Ubuntu latest runner. So in this case, the action that you used is an action that is defined by GitHub called actions /checkout. So this is the checkout that you use. If you actually go ahead and go to the docs, there are different versions, but it's recommended to use version 2 as for now. So in this case, what we are simply telling, we are saying, okay, for this job that we have started, I want you to run this job on the Ubuntu on Linux operating system. Then the steps that I need you to do, the first step that I need you to do is I want you to check out our code to our image. So which means each and everything that is in this root folder, in this case our GitHub action code, we want it to be checked out to our runner. So the action that you use to do that, remember this is a predefined action by GitHub. We are not creating an action. Our action we'll use it later on to deploy our Django application to Heroku. But in this case, we are using the GitHub action to actually check out our code to our runner. So this is how we do it. So once you have checked out your code, the next thing that you probably need to do is to now define your step of using actually the action, the GitHub action that we have developed. So in this case, we are saying sign in. We are going to name it as sign in to Heroku, right? Sign into Heroku action, okay, or sign into Heroku, right? So for this one now, we are simply going to tell it to use the action that we have defined. So remember, we have tagged and pushed our action to GitHub. So if we quickly go ahead and go to our browser, once we go to our browser, we can simply go ahead and copy the repository name. Don't include the settings, but we are simply going to copy the repository name and the username, right? Once we copy the repository name and the username, this is probably where this is probably the action that we want to tell our runner to use. So if we quickly navigate to VS Code and we quickly go ahead and paste our GitHub repository. So remember, your repository, it has to be a public repo, because if it's not public, you won't be able to access it this way. So remember, once you have done this, the next thing that you need to do is to tell it the version of the action that you are using. So we had defined it to be version 0.1. So what we've done is, for this job, the second step that we want to do is to sign into Heroku, which is what we want to achieve, because we've developed an index.js that is going to log in for now. So we want this action to sign in to Heroku. So we are telling our runner to use our action that we've developed, which is version 1. So once you have done that, pretty much what you need to do is to actually go ahead and define an ID. So this ID, I'm simply going to tell it to call it login. So this is the ID for this specific step. So I'm saying, okay, for this step, it's going to have an ID of login. You'll see later on where we are going to use this ID, but I'm just going to reference it by this ID. So after this step, it's now time to actually use our inputs that we have defined, if you still remember, in our action.yaml file. So these inputs, you define them. For example, we have the Heroku app name, the Heroku API key, and the Heroku email address. So now these inputs variables, to access them, you access them using the with tag. So under the with tag, this is where you probably want to put your inputs are variable. So for logging in, remember, like we said in the metric file, we only need the API key. So I'm simply going to copy this tag name, API key, and I'm simply going to pretty much paste it here, right? And we also need the email address, because remember, the metric file that is going to be run, that we're going to create. Remember, our action creates a metric file inside our runner, which means inside this Ubuntu latest. We are going to pretty much write the API key under the machine and under the github.heroku, if you still remember. So for this API key, for the value now, we can put, this is where you put the API key value. But remember, if you put it a plain text here, our action or our repository, it won't be secure, because we wouldn't want to actually expose our credential. So what you do is GitHub offers a functionality of storing secrets. So the way you handle secrets is you can use a helper function, a helper method, or helper function called secrets from GitHub, and you pretty much call the secrets, the secret name by the variable that would have defined. So I think I will shortly show you how you can create these secrets inside your GitHub. So in this action YAML file, I'm just going to reference the Heroku API key using the secrets. So which means we need to store these secrets inside GitHub. So there's a section under settings and secrets. There's a section where you can actually go ahead and store your secrets. So that's what we're going to do. All right. So now under the email address, we just need to rename it to Heroku email address. So these variables that we have defined, remember we said we're going to define them inside GitHub in our version control under the settings file, under the secrets section. This is where we are going to store the secrets. So the email address, you can put it as public, there's no harm, but for the most part, the API key, we wouldn't want to expose it. So I'm going to leave it like so. So once we have done this, the last thing that we probably need to do is the last step of actually setting our output. So remember, so this step, I'm going to call it get the output status. That's the name of the step. Then pretty much go ahead and put a run command, which is going to display whatever this action or our workflow, whatever our workflow is going to display in its terminal. So remember, I said, remember we had set the output, if you still remember in our index.js file, we had set the output here when we set the output with a variable called status. So if our code has reached this part, it actually means that it has successfully passed this part without errors. So we want to get the message. So how you get this message is you actually get it by actually passing by using the steps helper method. So I'm simply going to refer to reference it by steps, which means under steps, what do I need under steps? under steps, I need the ID for this specific step that I called login. Because remember, this action, this step where we are signing to, where we are using our action that we just defined, is the step that is going to give us the output. So I'm going to access it by the ID login. Then after the ID login, I'm simply going to go ahead and put outputs. Then under the output section, I'll get by reference of this status. So I will simply go ahead and put the status. So what this line does is it's actually going ahead, goes ahead and prints the status with this message successfully, let me just call it successfully signed in, like this. So this is the message that is going to be printed on this one. So once we have done this, I think for the most part we have done everything that we need to do with our workflow. So from this point, let's just go ahead and add this file, right, and actually commit it. So I can say created GitHub workflow, like so. So I can simply go ahead and commit this code. So once I've commit, did I save this? Oh, I hadn't saved it, sorry. So let me just for the most part edit again and git status. All right, okay, I need to go out of this folder. All right, then git status, like this, then git add everything, git status, like so, and git commit. So let me just commit everything. So now that I've committed my workflow file, let's just go ahead and push it. So once we push it, we are pushing it to the master branch. So once we put it to the master branch, what GitHub does is if it sees the .github folder and workflow, and inside this workflow there's a YAML file with our actions and jobs, what it simply does is it actually go ahead and starts running this workflow. So what it does is it actually say, okay, I run the command of push, then it goes and check the on tag. Then we're saying on push to what, to the master branch. For example, I'm pushing to my master branch, and it actually go ahead and starts running all these jobs that we've defined. So let's just pretty much go ahead and commit this to master and push. So git push origin master. So let me just forcefully push it. Okay, so I forcefully pushed our workflow update. So let's just go ahead to our Chrome and actually go ahead and refresh this. We should actually see our workflow being triggered, right? So right now it has triggered our workflow. For example, we have pushed this, and if you see this section where there's a green button, it means it has triggered our workflow. If we go on details, right, if you go on details, it's saying succeeded 21 seconds ago. So it means we just pushed it. It has run our job, and it has successfully signed to Heroku. So if we are to get this, they successfully logged in, like the message that we put the last time. And if we go the output, it's actually showing us the status. So the last part that I need to show you is off the video. I had put the settings. I had put, because remember, if I am to go to my VS Code, remember, under the Heroku API key, I had put my secrets here because I don't want it to be public. So the way you put it, these secrets, the Heroku API key and the email address, is you simply go ahead and go to your repository, then you go under settings. So if you go under settings, there's a section called secrets, which is the second from bottom. If you click on that, yours should be empty. There should be no secrets, but there's a button here which says new repository secret. So if you click on that button, you can actually go ahead and define your secret here. So I can say Heroku app name, then I can actually go ahead and say and app my name. So for the secrets, you are going to name it with this conversion that we had named in our YAML file, and you can actually go ahead and add this secret. So once you add this secret, for example, I've added the app name for demonstration purposes, it will actually be shown here. So as you can see, I had added the Heroku API key, and I'd also added the Heroku email address as my secrets. So that is why it's working. Otherwise, if I am to remove, so that maybe I can just show you, if I am to remove, let's say, let me just go ahead and remove the email address. Let me remove the email address. So I'm removing the email address as a key, which is important for action YAML file. Then I go ahead and go to my code like this, and I pretty much open on details. So what I want to do is I want to rerun this job again, right? I want to rerun this job. So in this particular case, we're expecting it to fail because we are not properly authenticating it, because we would have not provided the correct email address, or rather no email address at all. So let's see. So right now it has started. It's now checking out our code to the image that we defined. Then under sign in to Heroku, our code is failing, as you can see. So if we pretty much click on this arrow and we pull it down, we can actually see that our command is failing. It's saying error not logged in, and it has failed to actually proceed with other processes. So we can actually see the process of getting the output, we are not getting it because it is not past this stage. So even if we run the Heroku UMI, it won't work because it's saying we have put the wrong credentials. So let me just go ahead and quickly add the email address, right? Add the email address under secrets, like so. Add new repository, right? Then Heroku email address, like so. Then I will simply go ahead and put my email. So remember, the API key is the key that you find when you run that command, Heroku auth then token, auth then token. So now that I've added my email address, and I pretty much go ahead to my actions, I can go through here. So right now it has failed. It's saying this has failed, so I can actually go ahead and open it from here, from the actions, and I can pretty much go ahead and rerun all jobs. So once I've done that, it will start running our action, our workflow. like so. So here you can actually see that it has started sign in job in 4 seconds. So right now it's now running our workflow. It starts by running and it has finished. So if I go on detail, and you can actually see that it has finished. So it has checked out my code to my Ubuntu latest runner on GitHub. And when I sign in, remember we update the metric file on this Ubuntu runner that is provided by GitHub. Then once we pass those values, let me just go ahead and go to my code and open my index. So just for so that you guys will just get it. So remember, when you run the login functionality, at first on the Ubuntu runner it has to create a metric file for login. So this is the file that is created, and we have passed the email and the API key that we are getting from the core input, or which means it's we are saying core.get input, which means we're getting it from our action action file that would have passed here. So this is the data that it's getting. So once it has got the API and the email address, for the most part, it will then just simply go ahead and update the metric file, and then writes it to that file inside the root of the GitHub runner. Then once it has done that, if we run Heroku who am I, it will actually show us that it is successfully logged in. Then the status, for the most part, is the last thing that will be printed to say successfully signed in. So if I am to go to my browser again for the last time, and under the status, output status, we can actually see that it will say successfully logged in. So right now it didn't say successfully signed in, because we just updated the index file without pushing the new version of the tag. That's why it's saying logged in. That was before. So if you guys have successfully pushed your created a workflow and test your GitHub action and it's working, for the most part you now have the basic understanding of how you can create your own custom action. So if you guys have reached this part, congratulations, you have successfully made a GitHub action that authenticate to Heroku. So in the next section, what we are going to do is we are simply going to continue from here, and actually make sure that the Django application that we created, we actually going to deploy it to Heroku using Docker. So which means, for those who are not familiar with Docker, we are going to learn a bit of Docker, but we are not going to do much on Docker because that's not the purpose of this video. So we in the next section, what we are going to do is we now want to push, now that we have authenticated ourselves to Heroku and it's working fine, we now want to go ahead and push our project, our Django project to Heroku. And then once we have pushed it, then we would have completed the CDCI pipelining, where I am developing my project in my development machine. Then I actually go ahead and push it to my test runner, which is Heroku, which is the GitHub runner. Then from the GitHub runner, I'll simply deploy it to a live environment on Heroku. So in the next section, we are just going to do that. Stay tuned. All right, now that we are looking at our application, so what we're going to do is we're going to deploy this application using Heroku container registry, which means we are going to have a Docker image, and that image is the one that we're going to push to Heroku. So first and foremost, what Heroku requires, it requires for you to have a Docker file that will be used, a proc file, and a requirements.txt. So right now I am in my Django application root folder. So what I need to do for the most part is I need a proc file. So this proc file is the one that is required by Heroku, And for the most part, the proc file is simply going to describe our web server that is going to use to be used as a reverse proxy engine. So in this case, our live server for production that we're going to use is called Gunicorn. So just quickly go ahead and add a proc file. So I'm adding a proc file. So inside this proc file, the command that you need to write, if you look up the documentation, is you need to tell Heroku that we want to use Gunicorn as a web server. Then you need to put the application name, which is Django Heroku app.wsgi. Then you need to put log dash file dash like this. So this for the most part is provided in the documentation. Like for example, if you go to the Heroku documentation, this is where you get this information from in terms of deploying Django to application. So if I am to go to the documentation under configuring Django apps, you actually see that we need a proc file. So the proc file requires Gunicorn. So Gunicorn is the development server that we are going to is the production server that we're going to use to save our application. So let's just quickly go to the terminal. So now that you have added the proc file, the next thing that you need to add is your requirements file. So to create that, just simply go ahead and edit. So I'm going to say pip freeze and create a requirements.txt file. So since my virtual host is on, I'm supposed to get all the dependencies that I have in my requirements.txt file. So as you can see, I now for the most part, things that you need to verify to make sure that you have is the white noise, which is going to be our static file server. And then you should have your Django REST framework, a Django API, and Gunicorn for the most part. So you need to make sure that these three you have them in your requirements.txt file. So now that I've created a requirements.txt file, since I'm going to deploy using Docker, using Docker container registry on Heroku, a Docker container registry on Heroku, I obviously need a Docker file. So I'm going to create a Docker file. I'm going to create a Docker file, and inside this Docker file, I have a Docker file that I have here that I'm just going to copy everything and paste it here, right? So inside this Docker file, what I simply have is I'm just pulling a Python image from Alpine, which is a small based image. Then I'm setting a working directory in my Docker image to be an application. Then I'm preventing some debugging and buffering by setting these Python write byte code to 1 and debug to 0. Then for the most part, if I need to install the Postgres DB dependencies, but for this one, you can actually go ahead and comment this one. I don't think we're going to use it. But what you need to pay attention to is we're now copying the requirements.txt file that has all the dependencies that you want to install in our image. Then this I'm going to copy it to my app directory, root directory. Then I'm just going ahead to quickly install everything in my image. Then once I install, I then copy the root project folder, which is this whole folder, the Django app folder, into my app directory. Then after I've done that, I will just quickly run manage.py collect static. Since we're using white noise, it should be able to save our static files. So after I have run this manage collect static, I will then make my migrations and then migrate. Then remember, if you're working with Docker, you need to create a non-root user. So I'm creating a non-root user here. Then for the most part I will then start my development server using Gunicorn. So if you're using Gunicorn, remember you need to put the application name for your name. So my application name is called Django Heroku App, so this is the name that I just put here. And you need to bind the port to the port. So if you're using Heroku, you just need to put the port, then Heroku will actually assign the port for you. But if you want to test it locally, for example, we would want to test this locally, so I would need to put port 8000. So for now, let's just test it locally like so. All right, so if I go ahead and build this app image and test it locally, we should be able to see our application being saved at port 8000. So let's quickly go ahead and build the image. So I'm going to run the command docker build -t for tagging. So I'm going to call the image Heroku let's say Heroku-Django App, like this. That's the image name, and I'm simply going to tag it with the latest. Then for the Docker file, I'm just going to use the current directory, because this is where my Docker file is in the current directory. So I'm simply going ahead and run this command. So as you can see, it's now building our image. So it's now building our image with our application. So it's now it's installed. It's using cache, because I had initially ran it. So it's using, for the most part, it has used cache. It has used the cache data. Then here is now running the migrations and applying the migrations. Right now it's applying the migrations. Then after that, I think it should create the user, right, an non-root user. After that, then it will run our Gunicorn on port 8000. So you should actually see that we have created our Heroku app. So if I simply go ahead and run docker images and I filter by name, like so, and I say Heroku Django app, like this, right? You should actually see that we have built our Django application image about 20 seconds ago, and this is 311 megabytes. So there are ways of decreasing the size, but in this tutorial we are not going to look at that, of decreasing the size of the Docker file by multiple build stage and stuff like that. But in this particular case, we just leave it as is. So once we have done that, we need to make a container out of this image. So let me just quickly delete all the running containers that I have. So I'm just deleting all the containers that I have here. So let me just forcefully remove them like this, right? So let me clear my terminal to allow room. So right now, if I say docker ps, I do not have any running container, so there are no containers. So we now want to build an image. We now want to build an image out of this. We now want to build a container out of this image. So to build a container, you simply say docker run it, like so, and we are going to name it, let's name it Django API, like this. Then for the most part we want to run it in detach mode, and we need to assign it a port. So I'm going to assign it a port 8000 and bind 8000 from the container. Then I need to put my image name, which is Heroku. So let me just quickly copy this and paste it here, and then for the most part tag it like so. So what we've done is we're creating a container called Django API, and we're running detach mode on port 8000. So let's quickly go ahead and run. So it has created the container. So if I say docker ps, we should now have a container that is being run by our production server Gunicorn, and it is started 6 seconds ago, and it is being bound on port 8000. So if we quickly go ahead to our browser on port 8000, we should actually be able to see our application running at port 8000. So right now it's refreshing. Let's see, it's taking time. I don't know why it's taking time. Let me just make sure it's running. Docker ps, yes, it's still running. So let's go to the browser again. Oh, okay, so now it is loaded on port 8000. This was our application. So if I go to /API/tools, and for the most part it's supposed to return our REST API, and as well to make sure that it's saving our static files with white noise, we can simply test it. You can actually see that we have our CSS here, which means our static files is being saved by white noise. So this is exactly what we want. So now that we have built our image, now what we want to do is we just simply need to comment out this line and return this line for our for Heroku, right? So the next thing that we're going to do is we now want to write our action code here in our GitHub action. We now want to write some controls to say how can you actually go ahead and tag and push build our image on our run server, on our test runner, and actually push the image to Heroku. So I think we'll do that shortly, so just stay tuned. All right, so now let's go ahead and build and push our image. So before we do that, let's just quickly go ahead and go to the documentation. So in the documentation, what we want to do is we want to build and push our image using container registry. So what happens is you actually need to we want to build the images on our test runner, which is the GitHub. Then once we build the image, then we'll then push the image to Heroku. Or you can alternatively use Heroku YAML file so that Heroku will actually build the image and deploy it for you. But in this case, we want to do it on our own. We want to build the image and actually go ahead and push the image on our own. So for you to be able to do that, you need to make sure that you are logged in again. And for you to do that, you just need to actually go ahead and run the command. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually go ahead and create the application that we want to build and push. So for the application, you can just do it this way by creating an application, and you actually pretty much go ahead and push that image. So let's just go ahead to our terminal and create the application. So initially I can simply go ahead and check by writing Heroku apps like this. So it will show me the apps that I already have, but we want to create a new app, so we can type Heroku create let's just call this new app Django Heroku example. Let's see. So one thing you have to note that if you are creating an application, it will be it's like you're creating a new domain, so the application name should not exist. So like for example, it's saying heroku-django example is already taken, so which means I need to give it another name. So let me just call it heroku-django-123. Let's hope it's not it's probably taken. Let's see. All right, so 1 2 3 4 5, so it's saying I've reached the number of apps, so I need to delete some apps. So let's just go ahead and type Heroku apps. So my application was not created, so which means I need to go to Heroku. Right, and then just pretty much go to this application. I need to delete this application. Okay, and then I need to delete it here. So just confirm it by running Django Heroku app 001 and delete this application. So now that I've deleted the application, now I think I should be able to create our application. So let's just go ahead and go back to the terminal and rerun that command again. Let's hope this time it will create our application. So as you can see, it has created the application. If I run Heroku apps, you should actually see that the application would have been created. So this is our application name that we're going to deal with. So for the most part, I think we have created the application. So let's just go ahead and jump to the terminal. All right, okay, so now that I've opened VS Code, we need to go here. So here what I need is I need a method to say deploy to Heroku, right? Deploy to Heroku, so which means I need a method that is going to do that. So I can simply say deploy to Heroku, right? Then for the most part, I'm simply going to pass Heroku as an object. Then in here, I'm simply going to pull my app name, and I'm simply going to pull, yeah, for the most part it's just the app name. So if you actually go back to the documentation, the first thing that you probably notice is we need to log in. So before I do that, let me just wrap my method in a try catch block, right, like this. So remember, right now what we are doing is we are actually updating our action file, which means when we push it, we need to give it a new version. But for now, let's just go ahead and console log the message if there's an error. Then remember, we need it to stop, so we need to use the call method to set failed, so that it will actually give us the error that would have happened. So here I'll simply go ahead and do this. So inside this try catch block, this is what we want. So first of all, I need a variable to log in, so I need to execute synchronously to say, so that we'll be able to run the Heroku we need to log in into the container. So you simply type Heroku container login. This was from the documentation that you saw earlier, right? So once we have done this, then I want to be able to see the output message. So let me just buffer it so that I'll be able to console log the message. So here I'll just type login like this, right? Then the next thing that we want to do is probably build and push the image. So let's just quickly go ahead to the documentation, and under this section, so what we've done is we have logged into the container registry using this command heroku login. Then we already created the application, right? So once you have created the application, the next thing that you probably need to do is actually to build the image and push to container registry. So you can achieve that by just running this command heroku container /push web. So what this command does is it actually go ahead and build the image using the Docker file that we have provided and the requirements.txt in your test runner, in this case in GitHub. So once you have built the image, it will then push the image to the container registry and assign it a tag called web. So this is the command that we want to do, building and pushing. So let me just go ahead and copy this command, and okay, what happened? All right, okay, I'm copying the command and go ahead to our VS Code and pretty much go ahead and let me just put a comment, build and push the image to container registry, right? So here I'm just going to say const. I'm just going to declare a variable. I say build underscore push, right? Then I want to execute this synchronously. Then I'll simply paste the command, right? Then I want to be able to read the output, right? And then let me just console log it. Console log build and push, right? So here one thing that we probably need to do is for us to be able to see what we are doing, I'm just going ahead and put some markers here, and I will say okay, I'll simply go ahead and copy this. It's just so that we'll be able to read when we're now following through that terminal from GitHub. So here I will say login, right? So I will say login like so. Then after this section, we want to be able to build and push like so. So I will say build and push image. So this is not necessary, but it will just make our action more readable. All right, so now that we have done that, we have built the image and we've pushed it. One thing that we need to take care of before we do the last step is, remember, when you are working with our action, it will actually look for the when we build or when we check out our code to our image, it will check out the code that is in this root repository. But this time around, we want it to be able, because when Heroku runs this, when we run this command, it will actually look for the Docker file and probably the proc file in this root folder. But as you can see, the folder that we are working with is not in this root folder. It's under the Django test and then Django app. This is where our Docker file and our proc file and the requirements.txt file are. So if these files are here, we need a way to actually tell our GitHub action or to tell our test runner to say, okay, you have to look for a new working directory. So we need a way to actually be able to set a new working directory. So one of the ways that we can do this that I tried and that does not provide problems is to actually go ahead to your action.yaml file and declare a working directory as an input. So what I'm going to do here is I'm simply going to declare another input here called working directory. So I'm simply going to call it working underscore directory like this. Then this I'll put a description to say working directory, yeah, just to say working directory, maybe for our commands to be executed in, because if we don't put this working directory, it will use this root folder. So we want a way to tell our test runner to actually ignore this root working directory where our action is, but to actually go ahead and locate the working directory where our Django application is. So by default, if a user does not provide a working directory, it will just use the default working directory, which is the root package, the root folder. So this is our input. So now that we've defined our input, there's also one more thing that we need to do. We actually need to go to our workflow file. Okay, so yeah, before we go to our workflow file, let's just quickly go ahead and go to our index.js file, right? So inside this index.js file, under that object, Heroku object, we need to define a working directory. So here we can actually go ahead and say our working directory like this. We want to be able to get it from the core.getInput, then pretty much get the working directory like this, working directory, right? So I just need to make sure that the spelling is correct. So let me just go ahead and copy and then paste it here. So now that we have added a working directory in our application, since we are using nodejs exec-sync yopa callback function, it allows us to set the options. So the executable option, or maybe the directory where you want to execute your options in. So what I can do right now from here, I can simply go ahead and declare a variable to say execution options. Then in this execution options, I will say, okay, I will say cwd to say change working directory. That's what it means, to probably Heroku dot working directory like this. So what this execute options does is we are putting an option of changing the working directory to the one that would have been passed in our GitHub workflow. Right now we haven't passed this in our GitHub workflow yet, but we're going to do it shortly. So let's just go ahead and put these exec options in the files that requires the root working directory. So this one, the exec sync, it doesn't matter for now because we are telling it to update this path, so it doesn't matter. But and also this one as well doesn't matter for logging in, but this one, specifically this one, for our exec sync, we need to give an execute options. So as you can see, it's our VS Code is actually telling us that we need to now put the options. So what I can simply do here is I can simply go ahead and put the exec, right, the exec options that we have, so that whenever we run this command, for building and pushing our image, it will change the working directory to this folder where our app is, where our Django application is, and it will actually pretty much go ahead and build it from this working directory. So now that we have done this, we can actually go ahead and save our file. The last thing that we probably need to do is to update our workflow file. So if you go to our workflow, and under this section down below here, we need to pass the working directory. So I can actually go ahead and say pass the working directory as an input. So I can say working directory, and I will pretty much go ahead and pass the working directory that we want to use. So in this case, we want to use what do you want to use? We want to use tests in the root folder. So I can say /tests like this, then /Django Heroku app like that. So I can say Django Heroku app like so. All right, so now we have passed the value for our working directory inside our workflow file. So now our action runner should now be able to know which working directory we are working with. So let's just go ahead and go back to the index.js file. So now we have built and pushed the Django application to Heroku. Now the next thing, since we're dealing with Django, once we have pushed the image, the next thing that we probably need to do is actually to run the static files. So what we can actually do from here, we can actually say const, and then we say migrate like this. Then we can actually go ahead and exec synchronously, and we can run the command, because right now we are now in Heroku, so we can run the command heroku run python manage py migrate like this, so that this will actually make us migrate our application. And remember, we need to update our exec options so that it actually know which working directory we are working with here. So now I can simply go ahead and console log it to say migrate like so. So once I've done that, the next thing that we probably need to do is, if we are to switch to our documentation, now once we have pushed the image to container registry, the next thing that we probably need to do is to release the image to your application. So the way you can do this is you can actually do it by running the command heroku container release web. So I'm simply going ahead and copy this, and I will go back to my terminal, and I will simply go ahead and say and declare a variable and say constant, and I want to release, and I want to execute synchronously like so, and I'll simply much ahead paste this paste the command for that, and I will simply put my executable options, and I will to string this so that I'll be able to actually go ahead and console log it, so that we'll see what's going on in our action. So once we've done this, I think we would have done justice to our application. But one last thing that we need to do is I just need to put these comments so that we know what's going on. So in this case, I'm saying we are now releasing the app, right? So here I can simply go ahead and say releasing the app like so, and I will do it here again. I can say app migration for our database, then I can say app migration as well, like so. So once we have done this, I think for the most part we have done a lot, and I think if we pretty much go ahead and save this file, we should actually be in a position to actually build and pretty much push our image. So before I do that, one thing that we have created an application. We have created our application on Heroku. So this actually means that when we push and release, we want to be able to tell it which application to use. So to do that, I'd almost forgot this. To do that, just go ahead and go back to our push command. When you push here, before the web, we need to tell it which application to use, right? So remember, I had put this app name here, so which means I need to make this backticks, since I'm now putting a variable, so I need to do a backtick, because right now as it stands, it won't know which application which application we are pushing this image to. So we need to manually tell it that we want to push this image to the application that we just created earlier on. So same applies with the release part. We need to actually go ahead and do the same, and before the web we put the application name, and since we're using a variable, we need to put some backticks here. All right, so now that we've done this, when we release, it will actually know the app name that we are releasing the image to, right? So now that we've put the app name, one thing that we need to do is to actually go ahead and update our our workflow file under github main.yaml, right? We need to update our workflow file so that it will have our app name. So here I will simply go ahead and copy this Heroku app name, and I will put it here, and for the most part I will simply go ahead and paste the app name here. So the app name that we have used, let me just go ahead and go to the terminal and simply copy the app name. So from the terminal, the app name that we created was Django Heroku 123. I'll simply copy this app name and pretty much go ahead to the terminal and paste it here. So okay, all right, so this is the app name that we now have. So if you want to put the app name in the secrets, like we did with the email and the API, you can actually go ahead and do that. It's recommended. So you can actually go ahead and do that. So now that we have updated, because right now we have updated, besides this project application, we have updated our actions application, our GitHub action, the index and the action YAML. We have updated it, so we now need to commit these changes. So to do that, I will simply much go ahead and commit everything, including the application, and update the version as well. So what we need to do is I need to add everything, right? After I have added everything, I now need to say okay, so I can say git status. Okay, then I can say git commit. So I want to commit everything else except for the workflow, because I don't want it to actually try to but it's fine. I can commit everything, there's no harm. I can commit everything. I can say Django app and action updates, but it's not recommended because you won't be able to track your changes quite nicely, but I think for demonstration purposes it's okay. So I'm committing everything, and I can say git tag minus a minus m. Then I'll put my description here. I can say updated action version with Heroku app name, right? So it's now version 0.11, right? So I'll call it was 0.1 earlier, so I'm simply going to call it 0.11. So it is tagged. So after it is tagged, we can actually go ahead and say git push is it follow tags, like so, right? So right now it's trying to push the new version that we have updated for our Heroku. So it is updated to version 1.1. So let's just go ahead to GitHub. So if we go to GitHub under workflow and we refresh this part, let me close this up, right? You can actually see that our workflow has started and it's saying it has finished. So let me go back again, right? It has started and it has finished. So let's check it out. All right, so it's saying sign in to Heroku, get the output status. Let's pretty much open this, saying warning, there's an unexpected working directory. All right, so what's happening right now is, remember, we updated the version, but we did not update the version for our workflow file. So if we can go here and workflow and on the main YAML file, remember it's still using the old version. So which means if we wanted to use the current changes that we've made to our workflow, we need to actually go ahead and update this version. So let's quickly go ahead to our VS Code and actually go ahead and update the version. So right now we are now using version 1.1. Let me actually go ahead and save, and I'll say git add a git status, right? And I'll commit it, updated action version, right? And I will push it. So right now I'm just simply pushing the changes that we've made to our workflow, right? So I'll simply push it. So while this is pushing, okay, it started. We can actually go ahead to our browser and refresh it, so that we'll be able to see it happening. So right now it has started. If I go to details, like so, saying your worker has started. Right, so right now, as you can see, it's now building and pushing the image, and it's still running. So this sign in to Heroku, some of these action tags, we need to change it, because right now we are now deploying, we are now actually performing the full CDCI. We are now deploying our application to Heroku. So some of these tags we might need to change them, like for example signing to Heroku, or Heroku sign-in job for the action name. We might need to change that, but right now it's building. Let's take a couple of minutes. Let's see. So under that section that I've highlighted login, you can actually see that it successfully logged in into our container registry, which means the values that we passed to our network file were actually correct and were accepted. So it logged in successfully, and it's now on the building and pushing image stage. So that's the reason why I wanted to put this, so that we'll be able to track which step our action runner is on. So as you can see, now it's now running our image. Oh, it's gone. All right, let's go back. It's building and pushing, it's pulling our image, it's creating the Docker image inside the our runner here, which is GitHub in our image in Ubuntu, right? And after it has done that, it has installed a couple of things, and it's installing a couple of things, right? And where did it fail? Right, so right now it's saying your image has been successfully pushed, which means the pushing part, it worked correctly. You can now release it with container release app command. So before we released, we ran a migration. Right, so this migration part is the one that is failing. It's saying Heroku update available. So I think Heroku seems to have updated, so it means that it needs the app tag actually for it to be able to migrate. So I think we might need to add an app tag before on the Heroku migrate command that we just ran earlier on, because right now it's failing here. So the reason why of using that set failed, you can actually see that it won't proceed to release to the release part, because it has failed here. So I think what we can do is we can actually go ahead and try to put the app tag. If it fails, then we can comment the migration, because we won't be dealing with the database right now, and we'll try to figure out after. So let's just go ahead and go back to our VS Code and try to update our Heroku run here Python. So I think it needs an app tag. So what I'll simply do is I'll simply copy this, and I will paste it after run, right? And I will use some backticks here to accommodate our variable change, and I'll pretty much save this. So by doing this, it means we have updated our action file. So I need to edit again, I need to commit it. So I can say updated action with app name in migrate, like this, just a little more descriptive. Then git tag -a -m, then I'll put, oh, what happened? Okay, so I'll update it to version 2. Then I'll simply say this, and I'll take it like so. Then before I push it, I think I can just go ahead and go to our worker file and update the version as well, and I will edit git commit updated version of action. So I think I can simply go ahead and run this command. I think it should now use the updated version. Let's hope it uses this after it has updated the versioning. So let's just quickly go ahead and go back to Chrome, and we'll pretty much go ahead and go back to the code. So right now our action has started. So if you click on details, it's now showing that our workflow is now running. So let's just wait and give it a couple of seconds to actually, right? So it's now setting up the job, right? It's now signing into Heroku. So this is no longer signing in only, it's now signing in and deploying. So login successfully. So it's now in the stage of building and pushing the image, and it's running. All right, let's see if this works. So if it failed this time around, I'm simply going to comment out the migrate section, because we are not going to deal with the database anyway. I think that will be for the next tutorial. If you guys need it, you just let me know in the comments down below. So it's taking its time. So while this is doing that, just for a quick recap, what we just did with our workflow here, we just simply added a new section, because remember we are running this synchronously. After we have logged in, we want to deploy to Heroku. So the login section, it creates the metric file in our runner. Then after the metric file is created, it will then actually go ahead and logs in and do the rest of the process. So I think my runner is finished. Let's go ahead and check it out. All right, so it seems as if it has run without any errors. So let's just go ahead and open this so that you guys can actually see what went down. So it has pulled the image, right, and it has applied the migrations. So that command, we put the app name, is making it work, because I think they've updated their stuff here. Then for releasing now, it's saying it has released the app, releasing images to Django 123 done. So which means it has successfully released our application, our Django application to this. So now what we now need to do is to actually go ahead and go to Heroku, right, and try to open our app from there. So because right now we believe that our app has been released, so let's just try to open our app and see what's going on. So right now this is the application that we have, and as you can see, it's now saying it's a container, which means this app was built from a container registry or from a YAML build Heroku YAML file. So it means we have pushed our image. So if I open here, it's now saying that we have made one deploy here, and everything was working. So if you try to click on open app, let's see what goes on. Perfect. So as you can see, this error is actually good because you can actually tell that our Django app is working, and it's working on this URL here. So what we need to do is we need to add our Heroku app to our settings to allowed hosts, so that the next time we try to reload this, I think it should be working. So for the most part, if you see this error, I think that will be a big thumbs up. Pat yourself at the back because you have made it. I think it's now just a matter of adding this domain name to your allowed hosts. So let's just quickly go ahead and do that. Let's go back to VS Code, and under Django application, under settings, then we pretty much go ahead and add it here, right? So right now I'm now adding it here, and I will actually go ahead and save my file, right? So once you've done this, I'm sure our app is supposed to work. So we can actually go ahead and git add git commit. Where are we? Let's say git status. Okay, git commit -m, then updated let's say updated Django allowed hosts. All right, so we have updated the allowed hosts, and for the most part I think we just need to push it. Did you change anything? All right, so yeah, so what we need to do is, since we have updated this, we need to actually go ahead and rebuild our application again, and retag it so that it will use the there's no need for that. So let's just quickly go ahead and push it. Yeah, so you guys must probably notice that I'm pretty bummed now. I'm a little bit tired, but let's see. Let's just quickly go ahead and go to our Chrome, and let's see if our workflow has started, and yes, it had started. And let's go to details. So this is the commit that we just made, updated allowed hosts. So it's now rebuilding our application. Alright, so it's taking its time. It's been 13 seconds since it started. So I think this is all we need. Let's hope this works. So from the Heroku, you can actually see that we have updated our stuff here, and all the commands that we have done, they're actually showing here. So right now it's saying there are now 2 deploys, which means I think it is finished, and there's no error here. and there's no error here, and we can actually go ahead and refresh the application. Let's hope this time it will work. Boom. So as you can see, now our application is now running and is now being served by Heroku. So if you go to /API, it's now being served by Gunicorn. That's our development server that is being used by Heroku. And if we go to /tools, you can actually see that the whole application is now working. And for the most part, let's just quickly go ahead and check if the static files, if white noise is working, by just running Django admin. So as you can see, all the static files have been saved. So if the static file, if they were not saved, we would actually see that some of CSS will be distorted here, and the application will be right here at the corner. So it's actually showing that the white noise is working. So guys, this was it. This is something that I just thought that maybe I should share with you, and this is our repository. And if you have reached this part, congratulations, you have made it. You have made your own Heroku app, and congratulations guys. So I think one last thing that maybe I might need to mention is, if you go back to the code section here, after you have seen that maybe your repository is now ready to be used by the public, you can actually go ahead and publish this action to the marketplace. So the way you do that is you can actually go ahead and click on draft a release. Once you've clicked here, then you need to put the version. So which means this time around we'll be putting a new version, to say, let's say version 0. So right now it's actually telling us we are on version 12, so which means we need to put, let's say, version 13, because you can't create with the same tag name, which is the same version. Then here you can put your title, we can say heroku-django-deploy, then you can put your description. Then you can, if it is a pre-release, you can actually go ahead and tick this section where it's saying pre-release. Then after you've done that, you can actually go ahead and push your release. So I'm not going to do that because this is not, it's pushing, but I have created another one with more functionality than this one. But for the most part, I think you guys, you are now comfortable in creating your own GitHub Actions. All right, so I think one thing that maybe I can show you right now is, if you are one thing that you need to make sure that you do is to add a readme section. So what I can do is, maybe I can actually go ahead and show you the other repository that I have here, that I have published for production use, which is this one, and it's public. So you guys, if you can see this one, you can actually go ahead and look up this one. It's a heroku-django-deploy as well, and it's also on the marketplace. So I can actually say view on marketplace. I've published it on the marketplace, and also it has all these features. So with this one, what I did is I also added the readme, and this one, what is doing right now, what I've just shown you guys, is to deploy using container registry. It's a Docker deploy. But with this one, I've added deploying using Git, deploying using build manifest, which is the Heroku YAML. So it has all the three methods that we can deploy to Heroku too. And you guys, you can actually go ahead and fork and like this repository just to support the project, and you can actually go ahead and fork it and star it if you want. Then you can actually go ahead and look at this, or open at the source code, so that you guys can actually go ahead and use it. And if you feel that there are things that you want to add to this repository, I can give you as a homework. Like for example, this one does not check the healthy status of the application that have been deployed to Heroku. So if you want to add that feature, you guys, you are welcome to make some pull requests on this repository. So I think I will just quickly, I will put the link in the comments down below for this one, and the other one, the example one, I will just leave it there so that you guys can actually go ahead and use it. So I know that this has been long, and I just hope and I wish that you guys, maybe you have learned something and this was not a total waste of your time. I hope this was worth it. So if you guys have anything that you might need to ask me, just freely let me know in the comments down below. And if you like the video, just like, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you guys for watching. This was awesome. I'm Tafadzwa, and cheers.